If your goal is because, these people are damaged or whatever, and you're trying to reduce the amount of harm, well then if you're gonna qualify that with happily transitioned people, you want to forcibly detransition, you're gonna be harming them. You literally said that they're happily detransitioned, so it doesn't matter about reducing harm, because one, you're propagating more harm by forcibly detransitioning people, and for two, it can't be about harm because you're saying if they're happily transitioned, it doesn't matter. It's almost like they just don't like trans people. It's almost like they don't want to see trans people. It's almost like they want to remove trans people from society and either force them to be cis or who knows what else. But I'm sure the trans people are just overreacting. This is all hyperbole, we're just trying to get clicks and views and drum up social media engagement. When it's people like Helen, Joyce, and Matt Walsh who are literally also trying to drum up social media engagement, if that's the claim you're gonna make, except they're advocating for genocide. So unless you've been living under a rock, there's been a lot of discourse again around queer people. Oh my god, so crazy. No way, I know, right? Wow. It's not like every day we get a whole new reason for people who are just kind of uncomfortable with the idea of gay and queer and trans people existing have a problem with it. I don't know why, it just seems like they're mentally weak. Maybe they have difficulties understanding things that are outside of their own experience. I don't know what's going on here, man. So there has been a new thing that people are very mad about. Ostensibly, it's about exposing children to sexualized imagery. And you may have heard of this already, so here's an example. You might be thinking, is it this? So these, I believe, are Dallas Cowboy NFL cheerleaders that are dancing in a very provocative way. I mean, if you look at this. This is a fairly sexualized, they're scantily clad. You know how many children are in the audience? You know how many kids are watching on their television sets? You might also be thinking of like Hooters, for instance. All male creatures love Hooters, including kids, and you got weird images of Hooters employees, and there's a kid apparently looking at their breasts or whatever, which is strange. Kids eat free at Hooters on Halloween. You got a kid dressed in a Hooters outfit, which is really fucking weird. Where are the kids' parents here? You got this as well. This is strange. Caught the boy looking, this person uploaded 5 years ago at a Hooters. This is a literal child, almost an infant. Oh no, never mind, wait. Oh, we're talking about drag queens. Never mind, oh, I'm sorry. So I was thinking that we would be thinking about a myriad of other things that are consistently trotted out into our public space where children can see them, and a lot of, usually cis heterosexual parents like, yeah, go get him, my son, he's looking at them boobies, he's gonna grow up to be a lady killer. The straights, they're very into sexualizing kids. I don't know what to say, folks. Like, it is what it is. It's very strange. I don't understand it. But no, we're talking about drag queens. We're talking about drag queens. Of course. Of course. So, Lib's a TikTok of stochastic terror fame, the one that consistently gloats about how they've gotten teachers fired simply for talking about the fact that they happen to be gay on their own TikTok. But, we did a video on it. You can see a link to that pop up, I'm sure. A bar in Dallas, Texas is advertising a drag show for children, including the opportunity for some kids to perform with the drag queens on stage. This is the drag queen host. So this is the host here, but this is not what they're wearing in the actual event. So we look at that, and thankfully, Shu has decided to be unfortunate on the timeline once again. We've got Drag the Kids to Pride, a family-friendly drag show. It's a 150-follower account. It's a small venue. We've got a drag queen that's seemingly fully clothed. We've got some kids playing musical chairs. This kid fucking lost, like the dumbass he probably is. Idiot. How about you be a little quicker next time? You do have the sign that says it's not gonna lick itself, so apparently this bar does serve ice cream, so I think it's like a double entendre with that. That's what I'm being told anyway. There might be a different ice cream place that has the same thing, or I don't know. Regardless, it's in a bar. This is where we're at right now. In the videos that I've seen, the kids give the drag performers money, but the drag performers are not like nude. They're not looking like this, you know what I mean? They are dressing more conservatively than you would expect, really, if you've only ever heard of drag queens in a nebulous sense, but know nothing about them. So of course, this is literally just being used to attack queer people. Like, why is kids seeing people dressed up in these kinds of outfits an issue if kids seeing this is not? Well, it's kind of on the nose, really. This is what's considered normal. The normative position is that heterosexuality is normal. That's what's okay. So if a parent wants to sexualize their kid by posting a weird ass fucking video on YouTube that says caught the boy looking about a Hooters employee's butt, like, that's considered normal. Getting a onesie that says lady killer for your son who's 1 year old, that's considered normal. But because queer people are the ones doing it, well then, that's just too much. much. You can't have that for unknown reasons. Haven't really heard a good argument, unfortunately. The only reason that people don't like this, outside of like the on its face, ooh, it's kind of weird because these are men in feminine clothes and whatever, and now the kids are around, is just because it's queer people. It's just because it's queer culture, which drag is, and that's literally it. But we've even got some of the biggest and brightest names in the conservative sphere who are very about protecting the innocence of children to come out and actually answer the questions that I've asked, as I've posited. How is the Hooters stuff and the Dallas Cowboy NFL show stuff okay, but the drag show stuff that's family friendly isn't? Well, so this is from Freems, says, don't take your kids to drag shows. And here's two kids at a Hooters establishment. Got James Lindsay. Being attracted to Hooter chicks is normal except when identity politics lets them be fat or dudes. So listen, it's literally just because the people in drag are usually men, and it's because they are dressing femininely, which circumvents the normative position of men are supposed to be masculine, women are supposed to be feminine. That's literally it. Because drag is a gender non-conforming display, they're literally just telling you. Also, if you're fat, too, like all you fat people out there, I got no hate in my heart for you, but James Lindsay does, and you're not safe either, apparently. Like, apparently Hooters girls are not allowed to be fat by James Lindsay's standards. A little strange. So now we've got one of the biggest and brightest minds in the trans sphere, Blair White, because cleavage is totally the same thing as putting dollar bills in a drag queen's underwear, which we have not seen in any of the videos and examples I've seen of this event. We haven't actually seen that. And this is the major one people are bringing up. This is the one I'm talking about. But I would say that, yeah, if a kid is putting dollar bills in the underwear of a person, then they shouldn't be doing that. No shit. This one, they were getting money from people in the audience, and those people were kids, but they were taking them from their hands. And then James Lindsay says, cleavage is awesome, and then Blair White says, undisputed. So it's literally just because heterosexuality is considered normal. That's literally it. But anyway, as a result of this, because of the libs of TikTok blowing up this whole thing literally out of nothing, well, now we've actually got people mobilizing to this place. So this is Esquire, is a very good account, Alejandro Caraballo, that you should follow on Twitter. Says, I don't know how much clearer I need it to be that libs of TikTok is a stochastic terrorist. For those of you who don't know, stochastic terrorism is, so obviously, like, you know what terrorism is when people go out and commit violence and try to instill fear in people for political gain, simplifying a little bit. Stochastic terrorism is essentially using your platform that you have in order to incite other people to do that. So Chaya, who is the owner of the Libs of TikTok account, highlighted this drag event in Dallas, and violent thugs showed up to harass parents, children, and their families. This did happen. So, we've got a good thread here. An ugly protest today, a mob of self-described, quote, Christian fascists tried to force their way into a gay establishment in the gayborhood of Dallas, holding a family event while chanting, quote, unquote, groomers. So that's obviously the main thing that people are weaponizing. So let's see what's up here.
Groomer! 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 You guys are disgusting! Repent!
All right, these are not.
Repent for your sins!
So we've got some of the most soy people I've ever seen, and literally the king of the soy lords, John Soyle here. He's another YouTuber, John Doyle. So I guess he's just calling himself a Christian fascist now. Funnily enough, you know, theocratic fascism is also a very popular ideology among neo-Nazis and even the Nazis of the past, so that's interesting. I'm of two minds of whether or not them being open about the fact that they're fascists when previously they might have had to been closeted about it is either a good or a bad thing. I'm not too sure. I'm sure it could cut either way. But not very good, generally speaking. So this video, shared by Andy No, shows the terrifying moment a man who stated, quote, I'm a fascist, not a Nazi, charged out a family with two young children leaving the event. Anti-fascists blocked his path, and he attempted to barrel through them. It's unclear what he intended to do.
Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Leave the kids alone! This is a motion! Go on! Leave the kids alone, bitch! Leave the kids alone! Leave them alone! All of a sudden, you leave the kids alone? Yeah, leave the kids alone! Leave the kids alone! Hey, leave the kids alone! Hey, hey! Leave the kids alone!
So we don't really know what he intended to do once he got to the parent and the two kids.
Hey, I'm not walking up on nobody. I'm walking. These motherfuckers got him out.
So we don't know what he intended to do. However, we have some other comments about what they might have been interested in doing. So now we've got the so-called Christian fascists here with the John Soyle.
You know what my favorite thing is when every time when they talk about like black trans lives matter, what they're talking about is transgender prostitutes will get murdered by black men because black men just don't know their shit. They just freak out upon realizing like Protect trans kids.
Holy Mary.
If you couldn't hear that, I will paraphrase really quick. He said, was the funny thing about when people say black trans lives matter, he says that apparently they're saying that because they're talking about black trans prostitutes that get killed by black men or whatever, which is a thing that does happen, but that doesn't mean it's just about people who are doing sex work. In general, the so-called trans panic defense is a very common one that essentially just legalizes murder if you end up having sex, or not even sex, with a trans person who you did not know was trans. So this is what John Doyle is talking about. And that's not what Black Trans Lives Matter means. There's a multitude of things you could bring into that, but primarily it's that, for one, yes, black trans women face a disproportionate amount of violence that is motivated by hate based on their trans identity. For two, the visibility of black trans women specifically, and the amount of discrimination that they face is larger, usually greater than that of white trans women, for instance, because there's the added element of racism on top of it. And it's to say that trans women of all colors, but even, especially black women in this case, should not be victims of hate crimes. Seems pretty standard to me. It's pretty fucked up. But it's John Doyle, so, he's literally the most soy man possible that is attempting to feel better about himself and gas himself up by talking about this kind of shit. It's the only way you could probably possibly sleep well at night. We've got another one, quote, the fist of Christ will come down on you very soon, quote unquote, groomer, intensely violent, quote, Christian fascists who came to attack families at Pride made a number of explicit threats of genocidal violence.
The fist of Christ will come down on you.
The fist of, I'm sorry. I can't take him seriously, but unfortunately you kind of have to. So we can clown on these people all we want. They look foolish, they're silly, they're literally aggrieved over nothing, they have no actual reason to be mad, but they have a lot of institutional backing. They have a lot of people in the Republican Party who are willing to play ball with them. The makeup of the judicial system, the legislature, the Congress, favors these kinds of fascists, and that's the real fact of the matter. And because of that, you have to take them seriously outside of how fucking ludicrous and, easily clownable they are.
We're done with this!
Is that your fist?
You're done with this!
It's your
groomer!
Is your
groomer!
fist the fist of Christ?
You disgust me!
Very silly. And as is consistent with his worldview, and this should be a shock to nobody, but here at least we have it in explicit English, Christian fascist leader John Doyle encourages police to, quote, go in there and put bullets in all their heads, quote, that's what the badge is for. Talking about the drag kids to Pride or whatever event, the family-friendly event that was going on.
The sheriffs in Texas that did it last week all night with bullets in all their heads. They would be rewarded for it. That's what the bad. I'm not trying to be.
So, once again, paraphrasing because the audio's a little difficult to hear, John Doyle says that it's annoying how bureaucratic everything has gotten, they have to file petitions and try to file for protests or whatever, something along those lines. Then he goes on to say that the sheriffs and the police should go into those places where all these queer people are congregating and put bullets in all their heads. And then he goes on to say that they'd be rewarded for it. And then he says that's what the badge is for, which is a clear expression of intent, if I've ever heard one. I don't know how much more clear you need it to be. Now, you could say that John Doyle is this fringe figure, but his views are reciprocated in the broader Republican Party and a lot of the more, let's say, less PR-coached people, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has in the past advocated for violence against trans people on Alex Jones's show. Another tweet from Queer Trans People, quote, there is a broad hate movement that seeks to eliminate us. Anti-trans people, quote, that's absurd. We just have concerns and think there should be fewer trans people. You see how that's eliminations, right? And also, look at this. So, Mississippi Republicans says trans rights supporters should face a firing squad. Robert Foster tweeted that groomers, quote unquote, and supporters of trans rights should be executed by firing squad, then doubled down. So, it's not just trans people. It's not just people that are being accused of so-called grooming, even though there have been literally no substantiations of any grooming happening from any queer people that we've seen from the right. It's literally just a broad label that they'll call anybody as a means to dehumanize people and make it so that any violence done to them is seen to be okay. And of course, we've got the Pope of the transphobes, one of the least trustworthy around your children possible, Matt Walsh, out here. So a person in his comments says, quote, it should be illegal for anyone of any age to transition, period. And then Matt Walsh goes on to say, quote, yes, put another way, it should be illegal for doctors to do this to anyone of age. So this is a very common tactic when it came to the anti-abortion fight that we're still fighting, the pro-forced birth types. They would instead attack the doctors and the clinics themselves. So they try to make it illegal for doctors to do said procedure, in this case an abortion, and now in this context, prescribing people with HRT or whatever, because they know it's easier to go after the medical institution rather than individual people. Because if you go after individual people, well, then you have to go up against arguments like, well, what about people's individual liberty? What about the freedom, the individual liberty, the bodily autonomy of women to get an abortion, of an adult even, to get a diagnosis for gender dysphoria, or just go to an informed consent clinic and get HRT for their transition? The medical consensus on the treatment of gender dysphoria is HRT, is gender affirming procedures, surgeries, whatever it is deemed appropriate by the doctor and also the patient. So it's not just about trans kids. It's anybody of any age. If you look at their rhetoric as it pertains to queer people and kids, it's applied ubiquitously, universally. It's not just limited to drag. It's not just limited to kids being taught basic biology and sociology in the clinical setting of a classroom. It's wholesale. Every single queer person for them is a groomer. That's essentially what that term means, regardless of any actual substantive evidence. And him saying that he thinks in a just world they would all get bullets in their heads from the police, that's what he wants. Well, you might say, like, oh, well, even with this, if you're fucking insane, you might say, well, oh, these cries from the trans people or the queer people of the world, oh, you're just overreacting. Oh, but there's a genocide happening? Come on, be real, right? This kind of bullshit. If this is not enough to convince you, well, we've got more. We've got so-called, quote-unquote, gender critical, so TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, which aren't actually feminists, because you can't be exclusionary of trans women and still be a feminist. So-called gender critical author Helen Joyce says she wants to, quote, reduce the number of trans people. Helen Joyce, author of Trans When Ideology Meets Reality, is facing widespread criticism over an online discussion with Helen Staniland, both named Helen, curious, in which she said people who transition are, quote, damaged. Joyce, who has become one of the most vocal gender critical campaigners in the UK in recent years, said their movement is no longer in the consciousness raising stage. She said the gender critical movement cannot be focused on convincing every person in the UK of its views, and that it instead must, quote, get through to the decision makers. So we'll just watch the actual clip. So here's Helen Joyce on the right. Here's Helen Staniland on the left.
I think that for quite a while now, this has not been about consciousness raising. That's been irrelevant. That was important 2 or 3 years ago when there weren't enough people, but there have been enough people to be critical mass, to be funding the, the crowdfunders, to be writing letters to MPs, all that sort of thing, to have a movement, to have support for women and men, of course. I mean, there's people like Graham, of course, as well, who've got their necks stuck out on this. We can't win this by saying, there's 60x million people in this country and we've got to persuade all of them or a great majority of them. We've got to get through to the decision makers. And yes, in the meantime, while we're trying to...
So that's interesting. So, paraphrasing, she says, oh, well, we can't try to get public opinion on our side. We can't try to get our opinions, which are incredibly unpopular broadly, to become popular with, the people of the United Kingdom and try to get this done in a democratic capacity. Instead, we have to, as Helen Joyce says, get to the decision makers, right? She wants to get her hands, the gender critical movement's hands, on the levers of power in the UK. The judiciary, the legislature, whatever other institutions of power. She wants to get on her side because democracy is not. Where have we heard this before? Potentially you might see, ripples of this, vapors of this, about the Donald Trump presidency and the packing of courts at every level with activist conservative judges in order to circumvent democracy, which is one of the conservatives' most favored tactics, because their actual opinion's not popular with the general public. They're just not. So they have to go out of their way to subvert democracy in order to get what they want put into place.
Get through to the decision makers, we have to try to limit the harm. And that means reducing or keeping down the number of people who transition. And that's for two reasons. One of them is that every one of those people is a person who's been damaged. But the second one is every one of those people is basically, a huge problem to a sane world.
Well, that's interesting. So she says that the gender criticals of the world, the anti-trans, transphobic pieces of dog shit, says they have to try to limit the harm, whatever perceived harm they see. And she says that means reducing or keeping down the number of people who transition. And she says that's for two reasons. One of them is every one of those trans people is a person who's been damaged. Any sources or substantiation for that? Probably not. And the second one is that every one of those people is basically a huge problem to a sane world. So, essentially saying that trans people are apparently a problem to a sane world, and what they want to do is take people who are trans, who are part of the trans group, and force them, by the power of the state, to no longer be trans, to become cis. So they want to forcibly move trans people from the trans group to the cis group. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that kind of reminds me of other events of the past. There might actually be a word that describes it's genocide. That's literally what she's describing. She's literally just describing genocide. This has happened in a variety of instances throughout the history of the human race. For one instance, the indigenous genocide of Native America, there was literal outright violence to kill them, and also the assimilation that you might have learned about in history school, where they strip these indigenous people of their culture and essentially try to Americanize them, moving them from being indigenous to being American. You've also got Germany. You know, everybody I don't like is a Nazi, right? Obviously, of course, and possibly need no parallels. History doesn't exist. The Jewish people, disabled people, the queer people in Germany who were not conducive to the so-called German Volk and the ideals they had for them, they wanted to reduce the number of Jewish people in Germany, of disabled people in Germany, of queer people in Germany. Some of the first books that were banned by the Nazis was the Institute of Sexuality, which was founded by a Jewish gay man. There was a whole slew of research done around gender and sexuality science, and they burned all of that because they were scared of the idea of not cisgender, not heterosexual people existing. Well, those people were systematically rounded up and killed. That's it. So that it's literally definitionally genocidal language that she is engaging in here.
Like if you've got people that, and whether they're transitioned, whether they're happily transitioned, whether they're unhappily transitioned, whether
So she even goes on. She even goes on to say that whether they're happily transitioned or unhappily. So it doesn't matter if these trans people are following the medical consensus on the treatment of gender dysphoria, which is transitioning. It doesn't matter because, you know, these trans people, they just shouldn't exist. They should be forced to be cis, which is a very sanitized way of talking about that. At least you still got the kid gloves on. You know, we should be forcibly detransitioning people rather than just outright killing them. You know, at least we're being a little bit more kind in our approach. And you'll see that throughout the United States as well. There have been a variety of bills pushed by Republicans in legislatures across this country that is trying to forcibly detransition trans people, some of them going all the way up to the age of 25. You cannot transition until you're at the age of 25, or like we're seeing Matt Walsh say, nobody of any age. So happily transition doesn't matter. Unhappily doesn't matter.
they're detransitioned.
Detransitioners, doesn't matter. By the way, if you've been hearing this detransitioning talking point, it's a very small minority of an already small minority of trans people that do detransition. The majority of the time, it seems to be because of financial burden, because they can no longer afford the hormones or whatever other treatments that they need in order to maintain their transition, or social stigma, because being trans in our current society, because of people like Helen, Joyce, Matt Walsh, living as a trans person because of the social stigma, because of the ignorance of people, the lack of education, it's a huge social burden to be trans. So then they detransition from that to be seen as cis, to now no longer have to deal with all the transphobia that comes along with it, which harms them, by the way. If your goal is because, you know, these people are damaged or whatever, and you're trying to reduce the amount of harm, well, then if you're going to qualify that with happily transitioned people, you want to forcibly detransition, you're going to be harming them. You literally said that they're happily detransitioned. So it doesn't matter about reducing harm, because one, you're propagating more harm by forcibly detransitioning people, and for two, it can't be about harm because you're saying if they're happily transitioned, it doesn't matter. It's almost like they just don't like trans people. It's almost like they don't want to see trans people. It's almost like they want to remove trans people from society and either force them to be cis or who knows what else. But I'm sure the trans people are just overreacting. This is all hyperbole. You know, we're just trying to get clicks and views and drum up social media engagement. When it's people like Helen, Joyce, and Matt Walsh who are literally also trying to drum up social media engagement, if that's the claim you're gonna make, except they're advocating for genocide. So far be it for me, if you are going to claim I'm just doing it for clicks, to talk about how there is the conditions that might lead to a trans genocide, much less one that's already happening in the form of trying to forcibly detransition people in a variety of Republican-run states. Far be it for me to point that out. It seems to me that if it is just people doing it for clicks, well, certainly the people that are literally telling you to your face that they want to do it, those are probably the worst ones. Maybe I can be gaslit enough times to the point where maybe I am overreacting. Who knows? Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe reality. Anyway,
they're detransitioned. If you've got people who've dissociated from their sex in some way, every one of those people is someone who needs special accommodation.
What is this special accommodation that we're talking about? What is so special about this accommodation that the prescription is making it so that people can't transition, which contradicts the medical consensus on the treatment of gender dysphoria? What other thing do you think should be done, Helen Joyce?
In a sane world where we re-acknowledge the truth of sex. And I mean,
which contradicts medical and scientific consensus. The truth of sex, which is actually a false reality that they live in. The scientific and medical consensus on the issue of gender is that it's different from sex. Gender is a sociological phenomenon. Sex is a biological one. They are different. The way that people interact with those things differentiate often, even with cis people. But surely the trans people are the ones that are outside of the realm of reality.
People who've been damaged by it, the children who've been put through this, those people deserve every accommodation we can possibly make. But every one of them is a difficulty.
Every one of them is a difficulty. How? Every one of them is a difficulty because you've invented this warped sense of reality about how trans people are somehow a problem to who? Really? If they're happier now because they've transitioned, as you state, why do you also state that they shouldn't be able to transition? You're propagating the harm. You're doing the harm. You know, it's the stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself. That's what she's doing.
No, that sounds heartless. I'm trying to say exactly the opposite of sounding heartless. I'm saying every one of those people for 50, 60, 70 years is going to need things that the rest of us just don't need because the rest of us are just our sex.
So the rest of us are just normal. You know, you got to be careful. You don't want to say normal, but that's what she means. So the special accommodation, the medical accommodation she seems to be talking about is HRT, laser hair removal, gender confirmation surgeries, those accommodations. How are those really a burden on the rest of society? Do you think that the amount of resources and money spent on the medical prescriptions that doctors will give to trans people is really going to blow up the economy? Is that what you think? It would be shocking that anybody with any actual reasonable, logical understanding of the world could possibly think that trans people existing is going to be a burden on the rest of society. But it does remind me of how the German people talked about Jewish people as well, talked about queer people as well. All these people, you know, they need special accommodation. They were going to be a burden on the rest of the society. It's almost like we've seen this before. We're not being hyperbolic. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. Remember hearing that when you were younger in history class? Where did that go? I'm curious. I don't know where it went. Apparently, you know, you're overreacting. So Joss Pryor, who posted this clip, goes on to say she is literally explaining they need to infiltrate and go for institutional capture because they don't have the public support. They are talking about wiping out the existence of trans people, you know, exactly like the fucking Nazis. But of course, you know, everybody I don't like is a Nazi, right? Even though we can literally draw direct comparisons to the rhetoric being used, to the methods being used and described, to the legislation being pushed. People like these and gobshites, so I assume this person is also in the UK, critical support, like Julie Bindel and Janice Turner, say a few students complaining about bigotry on campus has a, quote, chilling effect on women. Chilling. Textbook Nazi extremist language aimed at innocent trans people is actually what's chilling. There is no epidemic of problems with trans inclusion, none. Until the right wing kicked this off, we were sharing spaces and doing just fine. We share spaces just fine today and in countries all around the world with no issues. We are not a problem that needs a solution, a final one, some may say. A reminder that Helen Joyce is at the back second from the right, a big pal of J.K. Rowling and her chums. The trans community has been proved right time again about these vicious bigots. If Helen was happy to say she wants to eradicate us on camera, what was she saying in private? And there she is. Right back there. Very interesting. And you know, here's this for fun. So we've got, courtesy of the serfs, Steven Crowder's co-host says, quote, I'll just let him say it.
It becomes this, look, I dress like...
So here they're talking about degenerates drag kids to bar for a drag show on the Louder with Crowder program. So it's, I'm sure it's the same one as we're talking about here.
Like, it's just in drag.
Well, Hitler was in part a response to this kind of culture developing in Germany.
Now, let's be clear.
Why do you bring that up? It's my question. Is that a good thing for you? Is that a plus? Now, you could say, oh, well, no, I'm just warning against this because if we allow for this degeneracy, if we allow for these queer people to have rights, well, then you're going to create another Hitler. What can you do? I mean, these trans people, believe me, they got to go back in the closet. They can't be out. Believe me, folks, many people are saying that as long as we allow for queer people to have rights, another Hitler's gonna happen. He was a bad guy. Come on. Why would you bring this up if you didn't think it was maybe a good thing that's how that would happen? And it is true. The very progressive Weimar Republic was a target of the Nazis for its, you know, degeneracy because it was a fairly progressive place in the context of the time period it was in. So that's interesting. Obviously, we're going to let them figure out what they actually meant here. Let's, you know, quickly back it up.
course,
defend Hitler.
no one is defending Hitler or saying
Of
that
course not.
The only point
I'm
that
saying that he was jumping.
Surely not. Nobody is defending him. No, definitely not, man. There's no way. Come on. You can't be this naive. So to further substantiate this claim, as I've been talking about ad nauseum on the channel, we've got Mixamanda Jet Knox. There are 10 stages of genocide. In some cases, these stages can happen concurrently. Right now, I'm seeing 5 of those stages play out when it comes to trans people. Classification, symbolism, discrimination, dehumanization, polarization. So if you actually, go to any like Holocaust museum, if you look at the ADL and their definition of genocide, these are things you're gonna find. Classification. Trans people are being categorized into other by many, and an us versus them mentality is being created. This is happening in various ways, and all of them are meant to cause harm. Symbolism. While not actual symbols, anti-trans words and acronyms such as TRA, TIM, TIF, trans child with the space purposely removed, etc. have been created by anti-trans groups to use when speaking disparagingly of trans people. This falls directly into hateful symbolism. Discrimination. Governments and groups in several countries have used political power, laws, and customs to deny rights to trans people. Exclusionary ideologies, TERFs, gender criticals, alt-right people, etc., are attracting numbers to their causes, leading to a ramp up in the discriminatory policies and rhetoric. We've seen this across the United States. The forcible detransition, bathroom bills, and all this other kind of shit. Dehumanization. Trans people are regularly stripped of humanity by written off as fetishists, pedophiles, groomers, cultists, or mentally unstable. Discussions about the burden, quote unquote, or problem of affirming trans people is now happening in full view, as we saw with Helen Joyce. Polarization. Propaganda is in full swing on social media sites. Media outlets are airing/publishing transphobic opinions, further adding legitimacy to their motivations. Podcasts, YouTube videos, books, and other methods of spreading transphobic propaganda are growing. An argument could be made for more, but I'm going to leave it there because 5 out of 10 stages is more than enough to say this is happening, and it certainly is. I'm tired of being told that I'm overreacting. I would rather be over-prepared than under-prepared. It's a very, understandable idea for self-preservation, right? I'd rather be over-prepared, and I think I'm adequately diagnosing the situation, as have a lot of other people. What's the harm in overreacting? I don't know that much has been cited about potential harm about overreacting. There have been TERFs on the timeline talking about how, these trans people are going to become increasingly violent because of all the outright bigotry we're trying to mandate by the state upon them for no reason at all. So eventually these trans people, they're going to do a violent act or whatever, and it's because of their overreaction. And like, you'll get shit like that, but you're hypothesizing about potential violence as a retort to people who are calling out actual violence. I don't think you have the best argument. But luckily, the right wing is actually coming out in the United States in defense of these kinds of policies. Thank God we're finally doing something. This person on Twitter says, 2 weeks after 90 kids were slaughtered in a Texas elementary school, Texas lawmakers are finally banning drag queens. So Representative Slayton says he will file a bill to ban drag shows in the presence of minors in Texas. There's no reason to suggest that drag is inherently sexual, by the way. You can have fully dressed up, like, to the nines conservative garb, like no skin showing at all except on the face, and still have it be drag. And when it comes to, like, drag story time or whatever, that's how it is. These people are, like, in essentially, like, Cinderella costumes, you know what I mean? And they're just reading stories to kids. So you'll notice that a lot of the people in the right wing are very excited about talking about how they want to protect children, right? They want to defend children. And we've seen examples, as I've shown here, of Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the biggest anti-child abuse, anti-grooming advocates in our Congress, who is, funnily enough, friends with alleged child trafficker Representative Matt Gaetz, also has now recently hired noted pedophile sympathizer Milo Yiannopolous as one of her interns. On top of that, protection of children. Oh, well, we also have in Ohio State Representative Reggie Stoltzfus, a Republican, says school shootings have been around for decades. They're not going anywhere. So we've got 2 options: hide behind the desks and barricade the door, or arm the teachers, arm the staff. So this is before passing a bill to arm school staff, which is interesting. School shootings have been around for decades, but why is that? Surely there is something we could do that might prevent them, like red flag laws, or wait periods for gun purchases, or mandatory background checks, expanded background checks. There are so many things you could do to attempt to stop this epidemic of mass shootings that literally only happens in the United States of America that the Republicans don't want to do, and actively push legislation that makes the problem worse in terms of people being able to get firearms with less oversight. So I wrote in response to similar arming the teacher ideas from the right. So a conservative solution, quote unquote, to school shootings is armed teachers, but the first classroom hit, the teacher would be surprised, not have initiative, and be less likely to neutralize the threat, which is true. If it is a potential school shooting situation and the armed teachers are the way that you're going to talk about how this is going to be fixed, so normally then the armed teacher is going to be in the classroom teaching their students, and then when the gunman comes in, well then the teacher is going to be surprised because the person that's coming in with the guns will already likely have their guns drawn. They're not going to have initiative in the situation, so they're going to have to pull their gun out of the holster, turn the safety off, aim, and then try to neutralize the threat. They're going to be less likely to then neutralize the threat. So one classroom's kids have to die as an alarm so that other armed teachers in other classrooms can show up and neutralize the threat. But this is the Republican solution. The Republican solution is essentially you allow for one classroom's worth of kids to perish so that that classroom can act as an alarm for the rest of the armed teachers to come and neutralize the target, which is ludicrous. And unfortunately, as a result of this as well, we also have a CBS News poll. 4 in 10 Republicans say mass shootings are unfortunately something we have to accept in a free society. But of course, the Republicans, the conservatives, these are the people that really care about making sure our children stay safe. Come on, think of the children, where 44% of them think that we need to unfortunately accept mass shootings, which would include school shootings, where we are allying with people like Matt Gaetz, Milo yiannopolous, people who do not have a good track record on keeping children safe, or whose rhetoric doesn't have a good track record on keeping children safe. But it doesn't stop there. Okay, so now we've got Ohio Representative Reggie Stoltzfus, a Republican. He's talking about, oh, school shootings, they've been around for decades. It's natural at this point. What can you do, really? Well, luckily, his state, Ohio, has actually put in place some measures to try to protect specifically young girls from the trans menace. So this is from Pole Vault Power. An account put together a really good thread about a recent bill in Ohio. Says, this is my daughter. She just turned 9. Here's why I would never allow her to play middle or high school sports if we lived in Ohio. So content warning, there's going to be some graphic stuff that we're going to talk about here that there are the unfortunate result of this bill. A few days ago, the Ohio Republicans passed a change to state law that was snuck in at the last minute under the guise of, quote-unquote, protecting girls' sports. This law allows anyone to dispute the sex of an athlete on a school team. There are no safeguards in place to ensure that this is not used maliciously. Girls who do not look feminine enough, girls of color, girls who are, quote, too good, are likely to be the biggest targets. But any girl could be targeted. Maybe someone doesn't like her parents, or maybe someone wants to make sure the opposing team does not have enough eligible players. So what does a girl have to do to prove she's a girl? So these are children we're talking about. Well, first, the physician has to examine the girl's external and internal reproductive anatomy. I have to emphasize that this will impact girls as young as 5th or 6th grade, around 10 or 11 years old. So content warning once again. Step 1 to proving your correct sex is female. A doctor will need to spread open your labia and examine the size of your clitoris. A clitoris that is too large, quote unquote, could be a sign that you're intersex and not female enough for sports. Step 2 to proving your correct sex is female. A doctor will then insert 1 or 2 gloved fingers inside your vagina while pressing against your abdomen with their other hand so they can feel your uterus and ovaries. This will likely be quite painful for these young girls and extremely traumatic. And of course, because there are no safeguards in place to stop this from being used maliciously, especially with the trans hysteria going on, there is no medical reason to do a pelvic exam on girls this young, absent any signs of a problem. This is sexual assault and will traumatize these girls. That is by design. Step 3 to proving your correct sex is female, your blood will be drawn and your testosterone levels measured. How much testosterone is too much? Unclear. Does having, quote, high T give girls an advantage? No, not always, but this bill leaves no room for nuance. Step 4 to proving your correct sex is female, your blood will also be tested to see if you are XX or XY chromosomes. Except not everyone is XX or XY, and there are XY women who have no advantage in sports because of the nuances of their genetics, but that won't matter here, of course. Nuance in this subject, there's no shot. This bill offers protection from retaliation for people who report an athlete they suspect is not truly female. There is no requirements that they make these reports in good faith. There is no protection for the athletes accused of lying about their sex. Any athlete who suspects they were, quote, harmed by an athlete who lied about their sex can sue that school district. If that athlete's parents are unwilling to have their daughter sexually assaulted or cannot afford the testing, the district will have to pay money to the accuser, which is a way to offload that financial burden onto public schools, which, coincidentally, Republicans are consistently trying to defund, which, coincidentally, Republicans are constantly pushing for charter and private schools, which, coincidentally, have a higher propensity for indoctrination, sexual assault, and have less oversight from the federal government because public schools, they literally have oversight from the federal government by design. Curious, really. So from an administrative standpoint, you basically have to require that all female athletes do this testing in order to play interscholastic sports. Otherwise, your district is in danger of having to forfeit games and losing litigation if you don't have this paperwork up front. Interscholastic sports in Ohio will be only accessible to girls whose parents are willing to subject them to sexual assault and very expensive and unnecessary blood work. Congrats to everyone trying to, quote, save women's sports from your trans athlete boogeyman. It's winning the most important part of high school sports because setting aside the incredible trauma and expense caused by this bill, at the end of the day, the message is that winning is what matters the most. That's not the lesson I want my daughter to learn from sports. So the people that are ostensibly in favor of protecting kids will ally with, alleged child traffickers who are currently being investigated by the federal government for that crime, Matt Gaetz, will, as Marjorie Taylor Greene has, hire pedophile sympathizer Milo Yiannopolous to be her intern. They also emphasize abstinence-only sex ed. They are propagating the conditions for child sexual abuse to go unanswered, to go unseen. They don't care. They don't care about keeping kids safe. They don't care. This has been the case for as long as they've what about the children. It always has been. Nothing has changed. The only thing that's changing is that their rhetoric is getting more violent. They're getting more comfortable in their opinions. They're getting more out and loud about their rhetoric and their intent. So there's that from Ohio, which is really fucking bad from literally anybody if you actually understand what the bill is meant to do. And to continue this, since we might as well pile it on. So there's been a story going around. I don't know if you followed it. I've been following it on Twitter as people have been talking about it. There's a Kiel school district in Illinois that had a Title IX investigation going on about bullying as it pertains to a trans student. I believe it was 3 kids who were accused of bullying this student on the basis they were trans. The school board for the Kiel area school district says it's ending the Title IX investigation into 3 middle school students who allegedly used the non-preferred pronoun when referring to another student. In a letter sent to parents, the board said, quote, "We have issued clear directives and expectations to all students involved in this matter for the purpose of preventing bullying and harassment and ensuring a safe and supportive learning environment for all of our students. Based on these actions and pursuant to school district policies and procedures, the school district considers this matter closed." What's interesting about this is that the school district has been receiving bomb threats from transphobic people that have wanted to have the school district do what it's just done to close the Title IX investigation. They are literally making terroristic threats to bomb the school to provoke the school district to close this case. And the school district folded. If you can't see this for what it is, then I'm sorry, you just have not been paying attention, or you're incredibly naive, or you're complicit. That's literally, I don't know what else I can tell you. If you've watched this video and you come away with it without understanding any of these things and thinking I'm overreacting, well then I don't know what to tell you. I've already tried as much as I can to reach you. I'm trying to cite studies, facts, figures, logical extensions of their rhetoric even. And if it's not enough, then I don't know what to tell you, man. So many people were asked, well, what can we do about this, really? Like, what can I, as a human being, do as a result of all of this? Well, there's one of the easier things you can do, which is electoralism. I know a lot of lefties will get mad at me for this, but if you are able to vote, if it is easy for you to vote, if you can make the trip to vote, you should vote for the least bad option in the general, which unfortunately is usually the Democrats, and also in the primary, vote for the furthest left option, ideally. Do your research and vote in these things. If it is not prohibitively, hard for you to do. I know people got a lot of jobs they work, a lot of work hours, but if you can do it, you definitely should. Because the Democrats are the only other viable party, because of the first past the post voting system that we have, that can win, mathematically speaking, third parties under that voting system cannot win. The primary reason why Donald Trump and his administration was able to flood the courts with activist conservative judges is because he was able to be the president, right? Those nominations, those appointments are made by the executive branch in a lot of cases. So having a Democrat there is unfortunately not the best solution, but definitely still better. But that's just electoralism. So there's other things you could do outside of that. The major one that you should do is organize in your community, get to know your neighbors, form community networks, meaning that you need to get together with other people with shared goals, ambitions, ideas, and just get to know them generally. And then as an extension of that, work together in a variety of ways to make up for the negative aspects of the fact that our politicians don't do enough for us. A very good example that you'll see from somebody like Beau of the Fifth Column, for instance, who talks about this a lot. I've cited a lot of his videos in the past, so there's a lot of these here. Community networking with Beau the Fifth Column. There's 54 videos if you want to watch all those. There's a lot of good ones that I've cited before. He talks about how in a lot of these hurricane-prone areas, the hurricane will often knock out the state's ability to help people on the ground that are impacted by the hurricanes. So usually what happens is that people who have formed these kinds of community networks will be able to distribute resources where the state can't, because the supply chains and the transportation lines, et cetera, are not really available. And it takes a while for relief to get to certain places. And some places never even see the relief. So usually what people have to do is organize in their own communities to be able to help each other. There's a variety of different things you can do. I highly recommend watching these videos from Beau the Fifth Column if you want to learn more about that. In addition to this, other simpler things and like even more fun and exciting things, like starting up a free public library or a community garden is a good way to get to know your community. The building of dual power like that is very necessary in order to, one, essentially stem the bleeding from the inadequacies of the government, and for two, literally as a method of harm reduction. The reason why you have to do any of that shit is because the government as it exists does not provide for these people or actively subjugates the people that need that help. Doing that direct action, building those dual power structures, doing that community organizing is literally harm reduction. And I am tired of these arguments that I might have with lefties, okay? About how, oh, harm reduction, it's not real, you're stupid. If you're going to talk about how, oh, don't participate in electoralism because harm reduction is not real and blah, 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 and you should be doing direct action instead, direct action is literally still harm reduction. Silly, come on. It's very important. And not only that, but it's fun. You get to know people. You get to have friends, make friends, even find, new loved ones out there, found family or even romantic interest. You know, it is what it is. Whatever you want to do, you can make it happen. And you're helping people. It's very important. Also, organizing your workplace, unionizing. So to end on a more positive note, as I would like to after a very heavy segment like this that's almost gone on for 2 hours. I'm sorry, Hyperaggressive. Sure, he'll shoulder the burden to edit this one. So we've got another unionized Starbucks. So this is Morgan on Twitter. Howdy y'all, we fucking did it. First unionized Starbucks in the Lone Star State. Hell yeah, brother. This is the 45th Lamar Starbucks, just unionized a couple days ago. Very poggers, very cool. This More Perfect Union, who you should follow, by the way. It's a very good organization as far as I can tell. They put together this map. Where are Starbucks workers unionizing? So this is updated June 3rd. Starbucks workers are brewing up unions across the country. Workers at 282 stores in 38 states have filed to unionize. Dozens of elections are underway or coming up despite Starbucks' aggressive anti-union campaign. So far, 115 Starbucks stores in 26 states have won union elections. Just 13 stores have lost an election. Very fucking cool. Very good. You also might have heard about the Amazon union, the Amazon labor union headed by Chris Smalls, who also won their union election for the first ever union in Amazon. The reason why I bring these things up is it's another way to organize. It's organizing with your fellow workers with your shared class struggle. The cool thing about intersectional leftism is that even if you don't share the identity of marginalized people, if you are a cisgender, heterosexual, white man, repent for your sins, of course, but also if you can't understand or empathize with the negative consequences of the oppression of marginalized people because you are those things and you just haven't learned enough, you haven't had enough experience. Well, if you're poor, which a lot of workers are in this country, in fact, most people in this country are poor, you can start to understand what oppression looks like on the basis of class. Class struggle is a thing that anybody can experience. Doesn't matter your race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, doesn't matter. If you're poor, you can understand what oppression feels like. And that kind of shared struggle can help you empathize better with the people whose identities you don't share. Very important. Very cool. So the reason why this is neat is things that I've theorized in the past as well. So for instance, if there is like a corporation, like Starbucks, for instance, that is funding a lot of transphobic and homophobic politicians, well, if you have a critical mass of unionized people working at a variety of Starbucks locations around the country, and you don't like that, you're probably going to have some fellow workers in your union who are trans or gay, who are affected by these politicians' actions. So if Starbucks is funding those politicians, well, maybe if you have that critical mass of people, you can all coordinate and organize a strike together, grind Starbucks to a halt, because without the workers, Starbucks is nothing, and then force their hand into stopping the funding of those said politicians. Just one example. It's a very helpful thing to do. And you should be doing it if you work in any of these establishments. You can contact the IWW, the International Workers of the World. You could probably contact a variety of other people, even on social media, who have also organized their own Starbucks or other firms. And it's not just limited to Amazon and Starbucks either. There's a variety of other unions out there. Very important, very good, very cool, very fun. And they can have positive outcomes even outside of the worker end, like I've just suggested. Pretty neat. Anyway, so that's a hopeful note to end on. Obviously, this is a heavier subject. To understand the intent of people like Helen Joyce, Matt Walsh, and a variety of other Republicans and conservatives in the country as being either complicit in or a unwitting buffoon in the genocide of trans and queer people is not really the most fun thing to understand and talk about, but you have to in order to fight against it. And, you know, I hope that if you didn't know some of this shit, well, maybe you learned a little bit. I hope the, you know, positive end note helped a little bit to, to keep your spirits up. I still, to this day, maintain a lot of positive hope for the future. Now, of course, it's not going to be easy. It's probably going to be bloody. It already is. But I do think that we will achieve the ideal future. But it's going to be taking a lot of work. And, you know, from each according to their ability to each according to their need is very, very cool. I think a certain guy said that. I think it's an important thing to do. So whatever you can do to help your local community, to help the people that you love, that you know, is also very important. So like I'm doing this content thing. There's more that I could be doing and there's more that I should be doing. But at the very least, I am trying to like spread awareness, all this kind of shit. And whatever you can do, especially if you can do more than what I'm doing or will do in the future, you definitely should. It's very important. And it is one of the methods that we're going to have to use to get there because we have public opinion on our side, you know? Helen Joyce wouldn't talk about how they need to subvert the will of the people, subvert democracy, because they know they don't have the public support for this trans genocide that they want to do. She wouldn't be having to say this or think about this if their position wasn't incredibly unpopular, but it is. Public support is increasingly pro-queer in general. You know, gay acceptance is through the fucking roof. Trans acceptance is going up and up as time goes on. More and more people are identifying within the LGBTQIA+ community. It's in a positive upward trend, which is why a lot of the right-wingers are becoming so bold, so abrasive, so out there about the things that they're saying because they don't want that to be the case. So we need to organize people and bring them to action in a variety of the ways that I've just mentioned before in regards to either electoral efforts or extra electoral efforts like community organizing in order to keep these people having the minority opinion and keep their hands off the levers of power. Oh, I think I've rambled enough. Jesus Christ. This video is kind of called as Trad Dad. Welcome to the 3-time Winners Association. This is the 3rd time you've won, which is kind of suspicious, some are saying, but that's fine. And thanks for also being a regular chatter in the Twitch chat of my Twitch streams. If you would like to be the next Connor Call It, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter, @ConnorCC, retweet the video links when they go live. Remember to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, god dang it. Put all notifications on when you hit the bell, appreciate that as well. Make sure you never miss a video. Remember to leave a like if you would like, and also leave a comment about something hopeful, because I'm pretty sure the video this is going on is a bit darker. So, stay strong, be good, be nice. Bye.